am with the Institute for Exposomic Research at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. I'm going to explain what that means. Rachel, you did pronounce that correctly. And I also work with a team of clinicians through our pediatric environmental health specialty unit and our New York State Children's Environmental Health Centers, which is a statewide network of specially trained clinicians with expertise in children's environmental health, so how the environment affects child health. And we receive funding to do all of this work from the NIH. So at Mount Sinai, we do research to uncover the environmental causes of disease, but we also do a lot of what I'm doing tonight, which is translating that research and educating not only the public, but also policymakers, decision makers, communities about how to create safer environments. And we also treat children who are exposed to environmental hazards. So much of that work that we do at Mount Sinai is really motivated by the figures that you see here in this slide. And I think you probably all know at least one person who's impacted by one of these chronic diseases or disorders. And we've seen a massive rise in lifetime risk for many of these common diseases, like neurodegenerative diseases that start in childhood, like asthma and autism, cardiovascular disease, food allergy, and so on. And these rates have risen in a way that really can't be explained by genetics alone, suggesting that there are environmental components behind all of these. And we know now that every disease, essentially, that you can identify is impacted by the environment in some way. So we take this approach to study the environment and health, which is called exposomics, which is essentially studying the exposome. So that simply means everything that you're exposed to across your lifespan, from preconception all the way to old age. And we ask how all of these external factors, which include chemical exposures like I'm going to talk about today, but also things like your diet, stress, medications that you take, and how that interacts with your age, your sex, your weight, your genes. And that's really how we examine how the environment is influencing health risk. And that's going to be kind of important to how we think about exposures that can happen through artificial turf. So I'm going to talk mainly about athletic fields, but if there are questions about playgrounds, I can take those as well. I'm going to talk about why children are most vulnerable to exposures that take place on artificial turf, some of the chemicals of concern, but also the evidence that we have for heat injuries and other types of injuries and abrasions. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about tips for safer play if you do have artificial turf surfaces in your community. So we have a saying in pediatric environmental health, which is that children are not little adults. And this is because they're physiologically different from adults, obviously, and their behaviors are really different. So they're closer to the ground than adults are. So they're more likely to get exposed to things that settle down in the dust and the ground. And of course, they like to roll around and get dirty. But they're also more susceptible to things like heat exposures because they don't hydrate as well as adults, and their body just doesn't naturally cool as well. And they breathe faster than adults do. So if we're thinking about things that can be inhaled, they're going to be more likely to have those types of exposures to air pollutants. So we've identified through the environmental health research that we do what we call windows of susceptibility. So those are periods of life when our developing systems are most sensitive to certain environmental toxins. And so we know that these are things like the prenatal period and infancy, but what's a little bit less appreciated is the evidence that shows that even through childhood and into adolescence, in early adulthood, while the nervous system and the reproductive system continue to develop, environmental exposures can be harmful. So we're worried about small kids rolling around on artificial turf and the things that they might get exposed to, but we also think about those older kids, varsity athletes, who are continually developing. And so this kind of goes back to what I was talking about in terms of this exposomic approach. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention conduct studies every other year where they look at chemical exposures in a representative sample of the population. And so what they find is that there are over 200 chemicals that are in the bodies of essentially all Americans. Many of those exposures are higher in children. They're also higher in Black and Hispanic participants. And these are chronic, low-dose cumulative exposures. And for many of them, we don't know the clinical relevance. We don't have the studies to show what the health outcomes are that are associated with having these chemicals inside of our body, but there are hundreds of them. And so we have to think about how they interact with one another. And they also come from many different sources, with something like artificial turf being just one. So this is why when we think about what looks like could be a low-level exposure that's coming from one source, like artificial turf, we have to think about what else that's combined with. What other chemicals are these children being exposed to? So this is just a handful of the chemicals that have been found to be in artificial turf. And I'll talk a little bit about what components of artificial turf they're found in. But for the purposes of this slide, I just wanted you to recognize that numerous studies, including those conducted by the US EPA, have found a number of known carcinogens, chemicals that are toxic to the nervous system, like lead, toxic to the reproductive system, like phthalates, endocrine disruptors, other types of plasticizers, and also respiratory irritants like particulate matter. This is just a small sample of some of the chemicals of concern that have been found in artificial turf. And they can get into the body through inhalation, so breathing them in, through contact with skin, particularly open wounds. There's a higher risk of abrasions and cuts that happen when you play on artificial turf. So the chemicals can get in that way. And they can also be ingested, often accidentally ingested through mouth guards and such, but also ingested by small children who play on these surfaces. So some of you may be familiar with a study that the US EPA has been conducting since 2016. And so this study began largely in response to concerns about what was previously the most common type of turf field, which was made with recycled tire rubber infill. And at the time, back in 2016, even though we had thousands of these types of turf fields installed across the country, the US EPA admitted that studies to date have limitations and do not comprehensively evaluate concerns about health risks from exposure to tire crumb rubber. And so these studies are not yet complete, but they did conduct a literature review, which showed that more studies are needed to understand the health impacts of playing on these turf fields, but confirmed again, in addition to the chemicals that I listed on the previous slide, that there's, on the order of 350 chemicals that were identified in this mixture of components of the turf surface, and that there are, in large part, very few studies that have looked at health outcomes related to play on turf. And they did some additional characterization of the fields, but it's important to note that this was not a risk assessment. So often these studies get cited by the turf industry as meaning that US EPA found that there was no harm, but this was not a risk assessment. They did not look at health outcomes, and they have not yet looked to see whether the chemicals get into the body with play on turf. So that is a portion of the study that is supposed to be conducted, but it has not yet been conducted. But because of all of the concerns around recycled tire rubber infill, all of the known carcinogens and neurotoxins and other chemicals that are present in that tire infill, many communities and turf companies have turned towards alternative infills. So instead of using retired crumb rubber, they use plastics or virgin rubbers, recycled shoes, some plant-based components. And this table here, I know this is really tiny, but this is just showing you some of those chemicals of concern, like volatile organic compounds, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These are all can be carcinogenic when inhaled, and lead, heavy metals, that essentially every type of alternative infill to recycled tire rubber contains some chemicals of concern. So like you can see here that they all contain some metals. So just showing that even those alternative infills have not been tested for safety. We don't know whether play on them leads to chemicals of concern getting into the body, but all of them have some chemicals that we should be concerned about. So not necessarily a great alternative to those older generations of artificial turf. But moving forward to 2019, it was long suspected that some of the other parts of the artificial turf fields may contain chemicals of concern. This is an article, I think, from the Boston Globe, showing Kyla Bennett of Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, or PEER, together with Tracy Stewart, who is a longtime advocate for safe playing fields. And she looked at artificial turf grass blades, as well as the water nearby where some of these turf fields had been deposited or dumped, and found high levels of per and polyfluoroalkylated substances, or PFAS chemicals. These are chemicals that have had a lot of attention in the news lately because they're really pervasive in the environment, and they're associated with a lot of negative health outcomes. So regardless of the type of infill or cushioning, tire crumb or virgin rubber or plastic infill that you utilize, this group has shown now that essentially all of the plastic grass blades that you test have PFAS chemicals. So why are we concerned about PFAS? PFAS you may be familiar with as the Teflon chemical. So the original Teflon chemical, which has now been linked to certain types of cancers and other health outcomes, is a PFAS chemical. They're used in many products that we use today, many consumer products that we have in our home, because they're resistant to grease, they can be waterproofing, and they're also stain resistant. There are, I think the number may be more like 9,000 PFAS chemicals. So although a couple of them have been banned or restricted, there are still thousands of others that the chemical industry can substitute for those that get restricted or banned. You might have heard of them more recently because they are widespread drinking water contaminants all across the country. In Connecticut, this has been an issue because of firefighting foam that has gotten into our waterways. There are less than 20 of these thousands of PFAS chemicals that are measured in humans. So when I talked about the studies that are conducted by the CDC to look at the chemicals that we're exposed to, those studies find that essentially all Americans are exposed to PFAS chemicals. We have them in our bodies, but we're not even capturing really a fraction of what is probably actually getting into our body from all of these products that we use. So why does that matter? So PFAS chemicals have been associated with a whole host of health problems, including high cholesterol, thyroid disease, ulcerative colitis, very specific types of cancers. Interestingly, recent studies found that individuals who have higher levels of PFAS in their bodies also had greater COVID-19 severity. And PFAS appear to interfere with the immune system, so that there's actually a decreased response to vaccination when you have higher levels of PFAS in your body. And then they've also recently been associated with problems with neurodevelopment, increased risk of infertility, and poor pregnancy outcomes. So PFAS chemicals can affect nearly all of the systems of the body. So for that reason, the state of Connecticut and the federal government have taken steps to restrict PFAS chemicals. So in 2019, Governor Lamont launched a PFAS task force. And recently, in the state of Connecticut, the use of PFAS in firefighting foam, as well as in food packaging, which is a major source of exposure to PFAS chemicals because of the grease resistance, have been slated to be phased out this year. And then just a couple months ago, in March of this year, the federal government proposed the first ever national standard to protect communities from PFAS in drinking water. And so what they've done for the first time, even though we knew that PFAS chemicals were harmful to human health, they have created enforceable limits for just a handful of PFAS chemicals. So for 6 different chemicals now, they're dramatically lowering the permissible level of those PFAS chemicals in drinking water. And so that's something to be on the lookout for in your own communities. But nevertheless, those are just a few areas where PFAS chemicals have been restricted, and PFAS is still present in artificial turf. And a number of manufacturers have become sort of savvy to the concerns of communities about PFAS and have made claims that the products that they're selling are PFAS free, or they may say they are not made with any PFAS. And nevertheless, communities have been deceived by these claims. Most famously, recently in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, community was very concerned about the installation of artificial turf. They really did their homework around this. They advocated for natural grass. They received assurance from their turf company that there was no PFAS in the grass blades. But when they independently sent the product out for testing, it came back showing that there was in fact PFAS. So it's really unclear whether the turf companies can make these products without PFAS chemicals. So shifting gear a little bit to talk about heat on artificial turf. So one of the major reasons that's often cited by communities for needing to install artificial turf is that it will increase the amount of play time. So it's, wet, muddy grass is hard to play on, and artificial turf allows for more play in bad weather. However, we would argue that these surfaces get dangerously hot, so that even on a moderately warm day, say an 80-degree moderate summer day, we know that our days are getting hotter. We're getting more high temperature days, even in the Northeast. Surface temperatures have been measured at up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. This is 50 degrees higher than natural grass, so much, much hotter than natural grass. And this holds for every type of artificial turf. So we know that recycled tire rubber tends to be black, obviously absorbs more heat. But it's not just the black infill that's increasing the temperature. So all types of artificial turf have a higher temperature, and watering really provides limited cooling. So the temperature spikes back up after just a few minutes. And it's not only the surface that shows increased temperatures, it's also the air temperature at head height is hotter than it is on natural grass. And this is just an image from one of my colleagues at Mount Sinai showing a satellite image where the red areas are hotter. And you can see this is a black asphalt roof, and this is an artificial turf field on a warm summer day. So, they say it can get as hot enough to fry an egg on, just like asphalt, like blacktop or rooftop. These turf surfaces are getting equally hot. And this is some data from my another colleague at Mount Sinai, Homera Harari, who went out and measured New York City artificial turf fields and playgrounds on a warm summer day. And so what he found, so the ambient temperature is down here. It got a little bit above 80 degrees. Here it got close to 90 degrees. And the grass fields stayed at around this temperature shown here in green. But you can see that the rubber surface is much hotter, so above 140 degrees here, and on the playground up to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So even hotter than asphalt in this case, and considerably hotter than grass. So what's the problem with that? So heat illness is actually the #1 cause of death and disability in high school athletes. Football players are most impacted, but you can see what these marching band students have to wear. They also practice all summer in very warm, sometimes wool uniforms out on the turf all day long. Skin burns. So remember I said you can get up to 200 degrees. Dr. Harari measured these fields at something like 140, 160 degrees. You only need to get to 131 degrees to get a 2nd-degree burning. So we know that children and athletes are getting pretty severe burns from playing on these surfaces. And so the Burlington Public Schools in Massachusetts actually are one of the only districts that I know of that put restrictions on play. And we argue that all schools should do the same, all communities should do the same, so that they should measure the temperature on the field and the air above the field every time children are going to play out there, and not permit play when these temperatures get dangerously hot. Injuries and abrasions have also been shown to be increased by play on artificial turf. Another reason that we hear from communities about the need for artificial turf is that this is the state of the art. Every community has a brand new artificial turf field, and our kids are going to play better on them. But we know that professional athletes actually don't want to play on these surfaces because they're harder, because they increase the risk of these skin abrasions. So the U.S. women's soccer team, this was Sydney Leroux back in 2013. The U.S. women's soccer team actually fought for several years to be allowed to play on natural grass like the men's team. And here she's showing why. And here you can also see what I referred to before. You can see how the infill, these little dots, are sort of stuck to her open wounds. And we think that that could be a pathway for chemical exposures. You also may have heard recently, if anyone is a football fan, that something like half of all NFL teams play on grass and the other half play on artificial turf. And many of the players now are advocating that they all be permitted to play on natural grass because they're getting really terrible injuries from playing on artificial turf. And similarly, there's been increasing recognition that it's very important to maintain artificial turf fields properly. That means that they should have tests for hardness done at least every year at many different places in the field. And if they are not maintained properly, children are at much greater risk of concussions and head injuries. And this is also temperature dependent. So the hardness needs to be measured at different types of years, at different times of year, and under different conditions. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on an emerging concern that you may have heard of in other contexts, and this is microplastics. So much of the field is like a giant carpet of plastic, essentially, and the plastic and the rubber break down over time. Particularly under different types of weather conditions. And so what we're finding is that microplastics are being shed from the field, and they can, get onto bodies and get into bodies and also get out into the environment. And this is really an emerging field of study in terms of health impacts. But microplastics now, so these are these really, really tiny bits of plastic, almost in some cases impossible to see. They're being measured both in outdoor air, in drinking water, in seafood. So there's a lot of contamination, ocean contamination with microplastics. So it's estimated that we inhale and ingest 5 grams of microplastics a week. We don't know what the health consequences of that are, but they have been detected in lung, in blood, and placenta, and then associated with a whole list of health problems. So another potential exposure, direct or indirect, from turf. And then lastly, I would really be remiss to not point out the climate change implications of putting down a massive grass field. These products are petroleum-based. They create heat islands in communities. And so this is of particular concern in urban communities where a park, a grass park, may be one of the only areas that a community has to go to for cooling. But as you saw in the New York City satellite image, you're just creating like a giant asphalt parking lot, essentially. They increase risk of flooding. They emit greenhouse gases during their lifespan, and then particularly once they're disposed of and break down in the environment. And we know, of course, that climate change has itself a whole host of health impacts. So what can we do? A lot of communities have these fields now. This is an example of a sign that I don't know if still exists actually in Westport, Connecticut, that was encouraging things like hand washing and taking off clothes and shaking off clothes and not eating on the fields. But we really recommend that, if these fields are needed in a community or currently in use in a community, that they not be used for passive activities, for picnicking, for cartwheeling and rolling around on, and that you remove clothes, shower, shake out your gear before you get in the car, take steps like that to, and certainly avoid use on hot days, as I mentioned. So there are some steps that you can take to increase awareness in your community and try to encourage safer play. So this is where my kids play. Nice Parks and Rec maintained grass fields. And so certainly the number one strategy that we recommend is to consider properly maintained grass fields. And you're going to hear about that. So I'm really excited that there is an expert here to share with you how that can be done from a practical standpoint. For playgrounds, there are alternatives to rubber and artificial surfaces. Be aware of greenwashing. Some of these, quote unquote, natural products claim to be safer. Artificial turf crumb rubber is actually sort of a greenwashed product because it's recycled. And so it was initially, kind of a feel-good thing. We can recycle tires, keep them out of the landfill, but put them where your children play. Look for transparency from manufacturers and consider where you are. This is actually where my kids play. This is adjacent to wetlands. And so particularly would not want runoff from a turf field there. And so I just, steer people towards a partnership website that we have for more information, together with the Toxic Use Reduction Institute, who worked with Springfield, Massachusetts on organic playing fields. And lastly, if you want to scan the QR code or visit us at Sinai Exposomics, we have, or follow us on social media, we have more information about health risks of artificial turf, about what you can do, and also about other types of environmental exposures. And so with that, I will close and turn it back over so that Adam can talk about organic playing fields.
Thank you so much, Sarah. If you have a chance, if you could put those two links from those last slides in the chat, that would be great. Super helpful. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to switch over to Adam. And just give me a minute to set that up. Don't forget, folks, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and then we're going to get to them at the end. Okay, Adam, so let's unmute you.
Okay.
Great, and let us know what you need, if anything.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for having me. I appreciate to get this opportunity to talk about kind of what we do here in Springfield. And thank you for the introduction. Although I work here in Massachusetts, I am also originally from Connecticut too. So I'm originally from the Prospect, Cheshire area. So all Connecticut locals here, or at least originally. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Springfield's organic program. Like I said, I've been doing for the last 6 years, and we've had a lot of great results with it. The people around the city absolutely love it. They want us to keep going with it, which is great. It makes me feel really good about the job that I'm doing. So without further ado, here we go. So our focus going green, like it's been our focus since about 2015 when it was started. A lot of schools and communities across the country are always talking to the youth the importance of sustainable practices. Really going green is something that, like I said, it's been talked about really more recently, as far as I can remember, and it's really coming along a long way as far as what we're trying to do here for the city. So, like I said, it's a big goal of both public and private institutions, recycling programs, green buildings, and all that. But of course, one big area is being overlooked, and that's of course the grass we walk, play, and lay down on. So what is organic lawn care? Basically, it's going back to the basics, using farming methods way back in the past, before those age of pesticides were treating your lawns. In short, it's pretty much creating a healthy, safe soil to get a healthy, safe turf. That's what I tell everybody. And it's achieved in 4 big ways. First being aeration of the soil, of course, amending the soil with organic material, and then overseeding, and then finally proper mowing techniques. I could talk about that a little bit further, or if anybody has any more questions, I would be more than happy to get into depth about what we do exactly with those 4 processes. So like I said a little bit ago, it was March 2015. We did an organic test run of 4 sites. Now this was it's important to know this was before I started here. I started here in 2017. So the city and the person before me, they decided to pick 4 high use areas: Forest Park Athletic Field, Treetop Park, Sweeney Field, and Mason Square. Now, if you looked at the Turry review and the case study that they did, these 4 fields are on the case study as well. And of course, they started in 2015. So they're among the original fields started in 2015 along with that site. And I think it was Treetop Park that really received a lot of the attention on that study. They focused, Turry focused a lot on that field. So the examples, like I was saying, aeration, soil amendments, overseeding, and proper mowing, just to show you guys pictures of kind of how we do it. The top left there for the aeration, that is an exact aerator that we use, one of the small ones for our smaller parks like Mason Square, Court Square, and those smaller areas that I can't get the big tractor to. And then overseeding, we also use the same size overseeder for the smaller parks as well. But for bigger areas like Forest Park, and Blunt Park and Van Horn Park, those 3 big parks are at least 16 acres in size. They use a large tractor to do the aeration and the overseeding, because I just couldn't do it with something that small. It would take forever. I mean, it takes about 5 hours to do with a large machine, never mind doing it walk behind. So yeah. Yeah, so just some photos to show you guys. So how is it going to benefit us? That's the big question. Of course, air quality, much like trees. Grass goes through the same process of photosynthesis, taking that carbon dioxide and converting it into sugar, and oxygen being left as a byproduct. Water quality, this is a big one. The fertilizer contain water insoluble nitrogen and 0 phosphorus. Does not contribute to degradation of water quality in nearby lakes and rivers. That's really big, particularly here in Springfield, because we're right in the Connecticut River Valley. I mean, we are, where I'm sitting right now is no more than a mile from the Connecticut River. And we have a large brook that flows right through the park, where like if we were to use synthetic fertilizers or any fertilizers that would leach, it would leach right down into that brook, and then the brook just flows right out into the Connecticut River. So really, really big deal, and it's a really big reason as to why we decided to do what we're doing here. And I know the environment thanks us for that. So, and of course, we're reducing the carbon footprint. The heating is reduced. I know Sarah Evans, she went over this. I like her numbers a lot better than the ones that I looked up. So these are a little bit more conservative as far as the bare soil temperatures and it being cooler. But I mean, you get the idea. On a hot summer day, well-maintained turf grass is going to be significantly cooler than pretty much anything else. So how have we managed our lawns in the past? After World War II, we had huge chemical companies that surplus the pesticides, and pretty much the home lawns was the big market for them. So DDT, I'm sure everybody has heard of, killed insects and mosquitoes. They started putting it on lawns and golf courses. So, and then I believe it was 2,4-D along with 2,4,5-T created what everybody knows as Agent Orange. Very bad chemicals, very, very bad chemicals, creating bad things and health concerns for people. So, and that's some examples of what we used to do and what we now know what not to do. So DDT, and then of course getting sprayed out of a plane, somebody standing on the ground. I've heard stories of kids back in the day chasing the DDT truck around the block to try to walk in the puff of smoke that it's creating. So we know that's pretty bad now. So health concerns, I'm not going to list all of them, but 30 commonly used lawn pesticides. A lot of them are linked with so many problems of carcinogenicity, birth defects, kidney damage, the list goes on. And more recently being linked to ADHD in children. It's a good thing we're figuring this all out now. So synthetic fertilizer processed with ammonia mixed with polymers and formaldehyde, very, very bad for your body. And another thing too, causing the eutrophication or oxygen depletion to rivers and streams. Once again, really bad for the environment, stimulating the growth of algae. So it just causes a lot of problems, not for us, but of course, so cancers in the colon, lung, prostate, very, very bad stuff. So.
Hi, Adam. You
Yeah.
seem to be fading a little bit, at least for me, volume wise.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah. Maybe it's just me, but
Yeah, just if you could speak up a little bit, that would be great.
Okay, all right, I'll try. I don't know how to turn the volume up. I'll just talk louder.
That's perfect.
All right. So this is, I love showing people this photo because it couldn't be more true. You know, you got the guy on the right, which is likely has an organic lawn care program, something to that nature going where with organics, I'm going to get to in a minute. It's not something that when you start the program, results are going to be instant, great, straight, awesome. You're going to get the best grass in the world. It takes a little bit of time, which a lot of people don't either have time or have the patience. The guy on the left, of course, using likely synthetics where it just leaches right off. It's kind of, I say it's kind of here today, gone tomorrow type thing, where you have to continually apply and apply and apply. And it's not staying in the soil, unlike an organic program where it takes time to build up into the soil. But once it does build up into the soil, you can see you have deep roots. You just have good soil structure, and you have the most important thing is healthy, safe grass. So I love showing people that photo because it's very accurate. So, and of course, health concerns related to organics, there's none. It's exactly that, organic. You know, it's completely environmentally friendly. And when I'm putting down fertilizer right now as we speak. I just did it today. I'll be doing it again tomorrow. People come up to me when I'm at the parks, at least on a weekly basis, asking me, you know, what we're putting down, and we explain it. But I also explain that I don't recommend it, but it's so healthy that you could actually eat it if you want, because it's 100% organic. So, you know, it doesn't get any better than that. Like I said, I don't recommend it, but it's not going to do anything wrong. So that picture right there is Treetop Park. So that was the major focus of the Turi study back in 2018, 2019. I took that photo. I want to say maybe like 2 years ago. It still looks just as great today. So always cost to consider. I said this in the last slide. It may take longer. It actually will take longer to become established, but the cost of the program will diminish after time as long as you get that safe, good turf going on, and you're not missing applications, and you're doing everything that you should be doing. It's going to work out for you in the end. So organic fertilizers being applied to the turf, like I said, build up the ground, creating a rich, healthy soil. And like I said, less fertilizer needed in the coming years. So this photo right here is Forest Park, which is right behind me right now in the office. It's the #1 field we've got going. It's the gem of Springfield. And it really, it is absolutely beautiful. I mean, from the spring, the summer, all the way through the fall, it looks stunning all the time. So, and it's 17, I believe it's 16.9 or 17.2 acres. It's a very large field, and it gets absolutely no rest. I mean, the field there's people on it right now. There'll be people on it tomorrow morning. There's even people on it when there's a foot of snow, snowshoeing right across it. So the field always has people on it constantly. It gets no rest, and it still looks amazing. So. Cost comparisons, did a quick study in New York, goes back to what I was saying before. Takes time to get in the soil. Time is very important to consider when you're running any kind of organic program, because like I said, results are not boom, bam in your face immediately there for you. It takes a little bit of time, a few years, as you can see in the graph. Once you get that soil healthy, once you get that grass healthy, it will stay healthy, and your costs will start to go down because the less product you'll need, because you're going to build up a healthy, safe turf. And then costs associated with pesticides, your initial applications, and then continuous applications. My next door neighbor does this, and you know, they have their signs, their little orange or red signs on the lawn for every so often that it's very often that they're applying the synthetic fertilizers. And you know, you have to continually do that multiple times throughout the year. So you're constantly doing that every year, and then, multiple times throughout the season, and then continued applications year after year. And then especially since COVID, I mean, prices of everything has gone up. So to think that fertilizer prices would not go up, I mean, everything has gone up. Our seed prices have gone up. Everything is just constantly increasing. So our success and awards. We got the Environmental Merit Award. I believe this happened in 2017 or 2018. That is the director of Parks, Pat Sullivan, great guy. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it here tonight to talk, but that's just him right there in a photo to show everybody, you know, what great work we're doing here in Springfield. And then I'm sure a big part of the reason why I'm here is because some people have read that Turi case study. They awarded us with $20,000 to get us going here with the organic land care. We really appreciated that, and we continue to still do that, like I said today. And it's been a very, very big success for us. So it's a lot of work, but it's a great success. We want to provide a safe environment for the children, for future generations, for kids, for the wildlife, for everybody. That's what we want to do. That's our big goal. And then we want to incorporate 2 to 3 parks per year. So since the Turi case came out, we've incorporated, I believe, 2 or 3 extra parks. I have to check those exact numbers, but we're getting there. We're right on track to where we want to be and what we're doing. I think I'm managing. When I did the case study at Turi, I was managing, I think, 65 acres. I'm up to 80 acres now. So. And then questions.
Okay, let's go to our gallery. We do have some questions in the chat, so let's start with that. And now this will be for both Sarah and Adam. Sarah did put some great links too, and I can save the chat for everyone and send it out with all the links as well. She also has a link to the case study that Adam just mentioned. Bruce, is there anyone developing a list of organizations in Connecticut communities that are fighting artificial turf? Citizens in any town considering fighting artificial turf generally recreate the wheel and becoming educated on the subject. It is an uphill battle to counter the many of the vested parties that want AT. Glastonbury is currently contemplating installing 2 more AT fields. The school administrators are gung-ho on more AT fields, and they see no downsides in spite of educational efforts to counter them. So does anyone want to take that does anyone know if there's developing a list of organizations of Connecticut communities that are fighting AT?
That's a great question. I don't know of anyone who has developed a list. I will agree with you that I get, inquiries maybe weekly from communities in Connecticut and other states, but many in Connecticut who are going through the same thing. That's part of what sparked us to create materials so that people can access. There's some, publicly available testimony and letters that we've written through Mount Sinai, so that everyone sort of has access to all of the information that we share. I mentioned the Partnership for Healthy Playing Surfaces. This was also the impetus behind that. So that partnership, I put the link in the chat already. That partnership does include an organization that's located in Connecticut, and it basically brought together organizations from New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Connecticut, who all have been working on this. And so the one in Connecticut is the Connecticut chapter of Clean Water Action, which is also affiliated with a Coalition for a Safe, Healthy Connecticut. So I would say, that's one place to start. Take a look at reaching out through that site that I shared, because that was sort of the purpose of creating that coalition, was so that everyone didn't have to reinvent the wheel.
Adam, Shawnee would like to know, what kind of grass seed are you using?
Oh, that's a great question. I was hoping somebody would ask that. So we try to switch up varieties every couple of years, because you really should. You want variety in your turf stand when it comes to grass. But right now we switched last fall, and then we continue to this spring to a 70-20-10. The 70 is turf type tall fescue, 20% Kentucky blue, and then 10% ryegrass. And it's a very, very good blend. I mean, I can't say enough good things about the turf type tall fescue. It performs very well all through the summer. Typically when your ryegrass is going to start to go dormant, it's a workhorse variety. It's just a really, really good grass. And you also want that high percentage of turf type tall because it's not really competitive when there's other varieties out there. So you have to saturate the ground with majority of the turf type tall fescue. But that's what we're going to right now. That's what we're doing right now. And then every couple of years, like I said, we switch. We'll do like a tri-rye blend, like a 50-50 blend as well.
Thank you. What, if any, has been the public pushback in Springfield of not having artificial turf as a status symbol? Does the organic decision apply to the school system as well as the municipality?
Absolutely. There's been absolutely no pushback to go for artificial turf. Actually, I can't say no. Just this year, one of our fields on the list, the central practice fields, is being converted into artificial turf. I don't know the reason why, but that's the only field that I know will be converted anytime in the near future. But as far as organics to artificial turf, every person I talk to is all about the organic turf. It's all about the organic program and all about natural turf. I haven't heard a single complaint or single person want to switch to artificial turf since I've been here.
Thank you. So I'm not sure if anyone from Bloomfield can answer this. Does anyone know if Bloomfield is moving ahead with artificial turf or leaning away from it? Paula.
I guess I'll offer what I know at this point. We're in a holding pattern right now, in part because of budget, because of budget constraints. There is, and actually we have I think our director of Parks, Recreation and Leisure Services is on the line. There's one park complex that's being looked at in terms of a redo, and artificial turf is being considered for the playing fields as well as natural turf. Our high school has artificial turf. At some point, it's going to need to be replaced because it is nearing the end of its, I think, typical lifespan. I think my impression is that the biggest concern is number of hours of usage and having fields, out of play in terms of town staff's concerns with natural versus artificial turf. And I don't know if anybody else on the line wants to say anything about it, but I think right now we're just kind of in a holding pattern.
Yeah, this is Dave Malesko from Director of Parks, Recreation, Leisure Services.
Yeah.
Paul is correct there. It's in a holding pattern right now. More information has been requested from the planning committee. So as a result, we've gone back out to Weston and Sampson, who is doing the park design for us. They've actually recently submitted a proposal for us for me to request additional funding so we can look at the cost benefits of the difference between artificial turf versus natural turf, as well as environmental impact for the area, specifically for Bloomfield. And I cannot speak on behalf of the Board of Education. They handle their own facilities. I do know that field is coming up to its useful life span, and I know that they have been requesting funding over the last few years to replace it.
Right. And if I may just add on, it's too bad that Mr. Sullivan couldn't make it tonight, but I did have a brief phone conversation with him, and he had mentioned to me about installing an artificial turf field at Central for the Central practice field. What he stressed was the use of organic infill, that being important in terms of what was going in there. And he made two comments. He commented on, I think, the heavy usage that field was going to get, which I think is why Springfield was going in that direction. So he made that comment. He also made a very, I thought, good comment about, maybe there are situations where artificial turf is better than natural turf when you're dumping, but you're using natural turf, but dumping synthetic fertilizer on it, because you can poison the environment and poison people by using synthetic fertilizer, on natural grass. So it was an interesting comment. I'd like to ask Adam, I guess, just one question. You mentioned that you're managing 80 acres, and my impression is that you're doing a huge amount of work with a very skeleton staff. So I guess, how many people are working on this with you? And then what is Springfield's ultimate goal in terms of conversion maybe of acres to organic turf?
Yeah, so it's me, and then I have an assistant. So it's two guys. I have a full-time assistant, and pretty much this time of year, from I would say when the ground thaws and we stop getting snow, and I can get on there and really the grass starts growing, I start aerating with my assistant. It is, like I said, it's a lot of work, but we get it done. We're working 8 hours a day, all season, from early April until probably around 4th of July, when the soil starts to get really warm and the mercury starts to rise and the grass starts to get stressed out. And then we let the grass rest over the summer, and then we'll get back after it in the fall again. So yeah, it's just me and another guy, but we make it work. It's the primary part of my job this time of year to be doing that. I mean, I've talked to you, Paula, during this when we were preparing all this, and I'm on the fields all day. The only time I'm not on the fields is if the grass is too saturated from a rain the night before, and I can't go on the fields because I don't want to damage the grass, or it is currently raining. Aside from that, I'm on the field all day. So I make it happen to manage 80 acres, but I love it too. So, that it's enjoyable to me. And to answer your other question, you said about where we plan to go. And that's a good question, because there's been no actual goal as far as we want to get 20 parks. We want to, I guess to answer that question is we want to be able to do as many fields as we can, as many parks as we can that I can handle. And I don't know what that number is yet. Maybe check back in about 5 years and I might have a better answer for you. But right now we're at, I think, 13 or 14 fields. We started at 4. So, we're getting there.
We'll have you back, Adam, and we'll have you back too, Sarah, to get updates.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is great. I love talking about this kind of stuff. And if anybody has any questions, I mean, maybe if you want me to just kind of go over what I do from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, I gladly can go over that. So.
Okay, thank you, Adam. There are some more questions here. One was, what are organic fertilizers? I'm not sure if they want the definition or maybe some examples of types.
So I guess definition, I don't have a clear and set definition. We use, I can tell you what we use. We use a 606 blend of OMRI listed organic fertilizer that we get out of a company based out of Rowley, Massachusetts. It's all organic. There's I actually have I have the ingredients written down because there's so many, and I just want everybody to know I'd probably forget it if I tried to commit it to memory. But the fertilizer has soybean meal, soybean hulls, and sulfate of potash. The soybean has high crude nitrogen content and is water insoluble. It's very important. It provides a longer feed cycle and doesn't contaminate the water. Like I was talking about, we have water all over us, so that is very, very important. The potassium, of course, essential for metabolic health of the turf plant. We use a charge, which is a soil amendment that I'll use typically before, this is of course all organic, typically before the fertilizer, which contains biochar, blood meal, molasses, and soybean meal. And so out of all that, the biochar, of course, intended to increase organic matter in the soil. It's in pellet form. And I knew this to reduce the risk of weed seed, as you normally would if you're doing like compost top dressing. You're not going to get any of that weed seed in there because it's in pelleted form. And then molasses, of course, a carbohydrate source for soil biology. Helps stimulate them as they wake up in the spring. So you want to put that down in the spring to get the grass going and green up in for the upcoming summer. And then trying to think of what else. The grass seed we already went over, and just a high cal lime that we use. Of course, the primary function of lime is to raise the soil pH. So you want to get it in that 6.5 to 6.8 range of pH, which makes the nutrients in their bioavailable form.
Sunny, did you have another follow-up on that?
Yeah. Do you have any brand names of all-purpose fertilizer for grass? That's kind of like what I was, or
Okay. Yeah. So we use a company called PJC Organic. That's the company that we use, and then their 606 is just their 606 natural fertilizer, and then their Charge S3 along with their calcitic lime. So the company is PJC Organic out of Rowley, Massachusetts. Very, very good company. Been working with them for a long time. It's their own brand.
okay. PJC as in cat.
Yep.
Okay.
The next question is, does anyone have figures on the cost of the two types of field, turf versus natural grass? So maybe somebody could give us an example of like a football field. What would be the cost for putting artificial turf versus natural grass on that same field?
Okay, I haven't looked at actual figures in quite some time. Part of that reason is because they've changed so much really since the pandemic. Everything has just skyrocketed. So I don't have exact figures for artificial turf, but I don't have that for organics. So I don't think I could correctly answer that.
Okay. Also, could you talk about, if possible, if you could tell if there's a difference in cost for maintaining the two?
Maintaining artificial?
Yeah, like what's the difference between the two for maintenance?
I can't speak on artificial, but I mean, if we're talking irrigation, and which of course is not going to be a thing for artificial, right? And then mowing are the only thing that I could think of, and then putting the product down. Maintenance, I believe it was you, Paula, that I spoke to about having to change the artificial turf every 8 to 10 years, which I found very interesting because I don't know much about artificial turf at all. I just know that it's very hard. So I don't know what the cost of that would be as opposed to, so like, let's say if it's changed every 8 years, would the cost of, that would actually be my question right back at you, is the cost of natural grass maintenance, would it equal that of artificial turf replacement every 8 years?
And this is, I think, what we're attempting to get at, that Dave Malesko mentioned in terms of getting comparatives to this Rockwell Park plan, is looking at the two. And you have, besides installation, you have to look into kind of ongoing maintenance and ultimately replacement cost.
I'd like to mention, you could look at those figures from the Turi case study. I think we had some numbers. I put some numbers together from the Turi case study back in 2018 or 2019. That could be pretty helpful. Of course, the prices would increase because everything has increased since then. But those were pretty good numbers that I came up with back then.
Okay, thank you.
Can I jump in just to follow up on that question there? What is your annual operating cost? It sounds like it's dedicated specifically for the field turf maintenance between you and your assistant, between the product and everything. Do you know offhand?
No, I'd have to calculate that number up. It would probably take me a little bit to do that. I could get those numbers, but that's something I have to calculate, and it's changing. It's changed this year as it has last year, because really, I think the biggest change was grass seed for us. Because last summer we had, can everybody hear me good? Am I being loud?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Last summer, we get a lot of our grass from Oregon. Of course, so it's across the country, so it has to be shipped. And last year, there was crop damage out in Oregon. I don't know if it was a fire, some other environmental hazard. I don't know what happened, but there was a major shortage of grass seed that we normally wouldn't have, and it drove the cost up. So this year, it's a little bit cheaper, but it's still, it's still pretty high. I could get back to you with real figures if I'd have to crunch some numbers for a while, but I don't have those numbers.
Okay. Do you know what the increase in employment would be for Springfield if your next step was to largely eliminate petroleum powered machinery?
Ooh, increase in manpower, you're saying? Right, was that the beginning, the increase in manpower?
The increase in employment, yes.
Okay, so if we're getting, pretty much if we're getting rid of our tractors, right? And all gasoline equipment, I mean, it would be significantly higher, yeah, because we're managing 80 acres, so it would take, if we're doing everything walk by hand, we'd probably need, I mean, I don't even know what that number would be, but we'd need a lot of people. Yeah, that's a good question.
Sarah, have you heard of any progress on this as a health policy issue in Connecticut?
No, I wouldn't say progress. I think more and more communities, individual communities are aware and looking to, fight this really kind of piecemeal, community by community. At the state level, several years ago, there was momentum around a ban on the use of rubber on children's playgrounds. But more recently, there was a lot of fear around passing that it would impact artificial turf fields. And so the industry lobbyists really came out against that. And the industry lobbyists have been really hard to fight at the state level, not only in Connecticut, but around the country. So I think, one of the issues is, I think someone mentioned, we always have the science and the science doesn't really get us there. One of the issues I think is like the work that Adam's doing is to really show feasibility and affordability. Like this can be done. We need this. We need more test sites, here in Connecticut to show, look at these beautiful fields that can get a lot of play hours that you can properly maintain. There's good evidence for that, but that's where I'm finding the problem. Like I'll find decision makers who say, we totally agree, this isn't great, we shouldn't be doing this, but our Parks Department says we can't do it. We don't know how we're going to get enough playable hours. The coaches want this. So we need more people like Adam, I think, out there really showing that it can be done.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Adam.
I'd just like to make a quick note about that I've talked to people about this program since we did it in 2018 from Maine all the way to Illinois. And a lot of the programs that people are trying to start are, I keep telling people it's very manageable, kind of what Sarah was saying. These fields that a lot of the people are trying to manage, I mean, there's 1, 2, maybe 3 ball diamonds or soccer fields. I mean, I'm thinking if I just had that, I mean, we're doing large scale work here, like if I just had 3 fields, I mean, it's, you could train somebody up on it. They could be the best at it. I mean, you could have one person doing just those fields, it could be their designated job seasonally, and you could turn a very, very high quality product. So it is absolutely manageable with the right person putting down the right applications of organics at the right time of year.
Does anyone know if there have been legal suits because of injuries on the turf?
I don't know. I know.
I'm not sure.
I guess we'll have to research that.
Yeah, the other thing I think that there was maybe a comment about cleaning the fields after every use. I think that is correct, that much like checking the fields for hardness, fields are not properly maintained, not raked, not cleaned. If you look at the manuals, there's a lot of work that has to be done. So, Adam's talking about the work that, he and one other person are doing on a natural field. If you are properly maintaining artificial turf, you still need to put in work. You need to spend money on equipment to clean it or to bring in maintenance crews to maintain it. Many communities are not doing that or not recognizing that at the time of purchase, that there are these additional costs. So it's not, totally maintenance free. I think as some industries try to sell it that way. And also, supposed to have some chemicals applied to it for cleaning.
Yeah.
Maybe not pesticides, but chemicals that, that some are actually classified as pesticides.
Are there any other questions for Adam or Sarah? Or Paula or Dave or anyone else? All
Thank
right.
you. Yeah,
Thank you so
Thank you.
much, everyone.
thank you both. Yeah.
Yes, we really, really
Welcome.
appreciate you taking the time.
All right.
All right, thank you, everyone. We'll post the recording and follow up if you have any questions, but we'll send out the links that were mentioned as well.
Very good.
All right, have a good evening, everyone.
Good
Okay.
night.
You
Thank
too.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.